want to thank you all for gathering this afternoon on this most solemn of occasions. Our family sincerely appreciates the flood of sympathy that has been shown to us in these trying times. But before my father's death, it was the countless letters of support and sympathy that we received that were the true brightness of my father's darkest days. These letters warmed my father's heart. The sentiments of sympathy and support were very touching, but there was something more that my father saw in these messages. Full bags of letters arrived daily, and we tried to read them to my father to lift his spirits. But what my father saw beyond the sentiment was where these letters were coming from. And they were coming from everywhere. People of all different walks of life, different races, different religions, former Confederates, different sections of our nation. And this is what my father had always wanted to see. It was the unity, the coming together, even if it was over his impending death. I remember before we came here to Mount McGregor, when we were in New York still, my father received some letters from some school children. Now, we reserved these letters for my little pet, Julia, to read to her grandpapa. What do you have there, my little pet?
We can read them together.
Oh, some letters for grandpapa?
Mm-hmm.
You want to read them?
You can read the first one.
Okay, let's see what was written to grandpapa here. There's been so many nice letters, hasn't there? So many nice letters from other children. This says it's from a Maria Casagrande of the 5th Ward Industrial School of the Children's Aid Society. She says, of course you do not know me, but Miss Sattery, who is our teacher, and we all love her dearly, but I do the most of all because I'm the oldest in school and I understand things better than the little ones do. So Miss Sattery tells us every morning about you, and dear General, we all pray that our dear Father in heaven will spare you to us until you are 100 years old. We know just how you are every day because all of our boys in school are either newsboys or bootblacks. And the newsboys, of course, read it in the papers. And all of us girls know how you are. I buy a paper every night just to see how you are. Last night I was so glad to read that you had gone for a drive. Miss Sattery always tells us you are a hero. Then we, all of us, the big ones I mean, study history, and we all know what you did for us before we were born. I am an Italian girl. Most of us are Italian children down here in our school, but there are other children too, some German, some Irish, and some colored children. But we all love you and pray for you with all our hearts and souls. When Miss Sattery told me I might write to you, I was so happy I jumped about and my hands trembled with joy, and they tremble still. I think you would like our school. We are all poor children, but we all love you. Dear General Grant, may Almighty God and our dear Savior and His Blessed Mother soon make you well, is the prayer of your little friend. You think Grandpapa will enjoy that letter? I think that'll make him feel good, won't it?
This one's from a Davy Todd who lives in New York City. We little ones of the Children's Hour of the 61st Street Methodist Church, New York, have heard that you are sick. We are very sorry and pray to God to make you well again. We know that you was once our president, and we have heard our fathers tell about how wise and brave you were in the Great War. We shall remember you when the big people now living are dead. We hope your example will help us to lead nobler lives than we would have done if we had never heard of you. Please accept our hearty love, good wishes, and prayers.
That's a very nice letter, isn't it? That's very nice.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have another one there?
Yep.
A Winnie C. the Ball from St. John's, Michigan, all the way from Michigan. My, Grandpapa gets letters from all over, does he not? It says, I am a little girl and have never been to school, but do my lessons at home with Mama. My reader is Harper's Young People, and this morning I read such a nice story about you. I went down to the newsroom to buy a copy to send to you, but they were all gone, so Mama said I might write and tell you, and if you could not read it yourself, perhaps some of the kind people who are with you would read it to you. Maybe perhaps you'll read it to Grandpapa, right? My papa was a soldier and loves you very much, but he is a lawyer now and does not fight anymore, though Mama says he often fights his old battles over again. He is commander of the post, and last week they had a campfire, and everybody made speeches about General Lee's surrender to General Grant. And our minister, Mr. Stearns, told all the people how he used to know you years ago at Sackett's Harbor, and that you were so good and brave, and how you jumped on a mule at Chapultepec and rode through all sorts of danger to carry an order for an officer. I shall send you a birthday card, and it will be a truly present from me. I shall buy it with my own money that I have earned. Mama says it is not a real present if you ask Papa for the money to buy it with. I shall put my name on it, so you will know it is from me, for I suppose you will get a great many. Goodbye, dear General Grant. I love you very much and wish you could do something to make you well. I believe that will cheer Grandpapa greatly, don't you?
Yep.
These letters have done so much for him,
Yep.
being sick, and certainly to have his darling pet to read some of them to him is a great joy to him. These are the letters that helped sustain my father in his final months as he struggled to finish his book for us. Support also came in the form of money. Now, my father would not take charity, but a Mr. Charles Wood of Troy would send my father a loan, a check for $500, and a second one would come later. Mr. Wood said, this is payment for Appomattox. Well, my father accepted this as it was a loan, and it was right at a moment where we desperately needed it as a family. I recall once we had come to Mount McGregor here, my father heard that Mr. Wood was here at the resort. And he agreed to see Mr. Wood. They had a conversation together. I did not hear exactly what they were talking about. But as Mr. Wood left the porch, I ran into him. And he was quite overtaken with emotion. In order to explain himself, he handed me the note. And it was my father who had written, though there be much unblushing wickedness in this world, yet there is a compensating generosity and grandeur of the soul. My father's faith in humanity had been shaken by the young man
that had bankrupted us. But Mr. Wood's generous offer at that moment restored the balance. The press was understandably interested in my father's condition, especially after they learned of the seriousness of my father's illness in March. They kept up a 24-hour vigil across from our home in New York, and well, for a while they were pestering everyone that came and went from our home. And the doctors were hesitant to speak to the press, but eventually that would change. I remember a Mr. Henry Stoddard that covered the story in New York and came here as well to Mount McGregor. My father had nothing against the members of the press. These newspapermen, in fact, some of them he became very close to in these final months. Mr. Stoddard was one of those.
It was my fortune to cover for the Philadelphia Press the men who figure largely in American history. I first saw General Grant when I called at his cottage at Long Branch on the Jersey coast in the summer of 1882. Grant was seated alone in a little summer house on the bluff overlooking the ocean. It was a rule of the Grant family that no one was to disturb him at such times, but as I had not been informed of it, I ignorantly broke in on the general's meditation. Whatever his first impulse may have been, he smiled when I stated my purpose, and thereafter became more interested in the ocean than in my presence. Later I was told he liked to go down there by himself and for an hour or so, smoke cigars and look out silently upon the ocean. After such a career, what thoughts he must have had! No one could be more modest or affable. He was a good mixer in company he liked, and he loved to hit up a stiff pace behind a pair of lively horses. I was too young to be deeply impressed by faces, but in later years I recalled my impression of Grant's face. I saw the face of a man with many unexpressed thoughts, not all of them pleasant. Early in 1885, I went to New York City to report General Grant's gallant fight against the inevitable there and at Mount McGregor, where he died. The vigil, almost at Grant's bedside in particular, gave me many opportunities to study him at close range, especially toward the last at Mount McGregor, under conditions that tested the fiber of the man and bared it to the world as only tense suffering can do. I had seen him frequently in the summer of 1882 and in 1883 as he drove along the Ocean Drive at Long Branch, New Jersey, and once I had interviewed him at his home there. But it was a different Grant that I looked upon in New York City in 1885, suffering from cancer. In the early period of his illness, he was frequently able to leave his bed for an hour or so. He would sit in an armchair in front of the second-story window of his house, 3 East 66th Street. At times he would stand for a few moments looking out. Always there was a group of 3 or 4 correspondents gathered on the opposite sidewalk. We had established a patrol and took turns on duty day and night. When not too depressed, Grant would recognize some of the newspapermen he knew and smile pleasantly. Pleasantly, but sadly. Very sadly. During his illness, demand for news from the sick room was keen and sincere. It put a heavy strain upon the newspapermen covering the case, for the early attitude of both doctors and family made it difficult to ascertain the facts. They did not realize at first the pressure from the public for news, nor the wrong impression created by secrecy. Doctors have not much regard for public interest in their patients and are reluctant to make known the facts in the sick room. In their eyes, the only news is that the patient dies or gets well. Meanwhile, silence. But the physicians owe it to the public when a man whose career is history and lies stricken on a sickbed, perhaps a deathbed. The interest of the people is much more than curiosity. It is the companion piece of patriotism. Grant's doctors did not appreciate this fact. When entering or leaving the general's house, they turned from reporters as though escaping from hold-up men. Once Deacon Ransom of the New York Tribune saw his opportunity and told Dr. Sands, looking him straight in the eye, "We represent 50 million people, and every man, woman, and child is deeply interested in this dying man who saved the nation for them. We are here to get the news and give it to those 50 million people. Is it for you to say whether they are to have it?" Dr. Sands seemed stunned. Then he gave way completely. "Perhaps you're right," he said. A kindlier expression swept away his frown. So the full story of General Grant's terrific struggle for life that April morning was promptly made known. The facts, serious as they were less distressing to the country than if a policy of secrecy had been maintained. No one could watch General Grant as I did for weeks, while he was under the strain of full knowledge of his approaching death, without getting an insight into the real man. Patient, burden-bearing, and trustful he surely was. He was then struggling to complete his memoirs in the hope that the sale would furnish financial provision for his family. It was a race with death for a fortune. On Mount McGregor, he won it by a few days. With the task done, collapse quickly followed. Some years later, standing on the porch of that cottage while delivering an anniversary address commemorating Grant's death there, ex-President Benjamin Harrison used this memorable sentence: "It is said that a great life went out here. Great lives, as General Grant's, never go out. They go on."
Some of the most difficult letters to transcribe from my father. Of course, my father, I took care of most of the correspondence from my father in the latter months. If it were possible for my father to have responded to everyone that sent him sympathy and support, he would have. But of course, that would be impossible. The best he could do was to put his sentiments into the paper so that all could read, and read his thankfulness. But the most difficult of all of these was the letters to the veterans. They loved my father as a father, and he loved them as well as children. He had me write to the Grand Army of the Republic encampment, "Tell the boys that they probably will never look into my face again, nor hear my voice, but they are engraved on my heart, and I love them as my children. What the good Lord is for is more than I can tell, but it is perhaps to finish up my book, which I shall leave to the boys in blue, and in which they cannot only see me, but follow me in the acts in which they help me." Sometime later, my father received a response from the Grand Army, and I wrote again, "General Grant directs me to tender to each one of the 300,000 veterans, his comrades, now represented at Portland, his thanks for their interest in his health and welfare. General Grant wishes to take this occasion to also thank them for their splendid services, which have resulted in giving freedom to a race, peace to a continent, and a haven to the oppressed of the world." And that would be my father's final message to his fellow veterans. It was not only the messages of support that we received in the papers and in the letters, but it was the tender care of the physicians and the nurses that took care of my father. Towards the end, he wrote them a letter thanking them and telling them how important it was what they had done for him. I am thankful for the providential extension of my time to enable me to continue my work. I am further thankful, and in a greater degree thankful, because it has enabled me to see for myself the happy harmony which has so suddenly sprung up between those a few short years ago in deadly conflict. It has been an inestimable blessing to hear the kind expressions towards me in person from all parts of our country, from people of all nationalities, of all regions, and of no religion, of Confederates and of national troops alike, of soldiers' organizations, of mechanical, scientific, religious, and other societies, embracing almost every citizen in the land. They have brought joy to my heart, if they have not effected a cure. So to you and your colleagues, I acknowledge my indebtedness for having brought me through the valley of the shadow of death, to enable one to witness these things.
It has been a long and trying time caring for General Grant, and I was on the edge of an abrupt break when the death of my patient ended my vigils. It was a full 3 months since I had a continuous night's sleep. My head was dizzy, my step was faltering. My work is ended. I have now only to follow to the grave the man I loved and for whom I have devoted my life these many months. I could not cure him, but I could, by close and continuous care, alleviate his suffering and possibly prolong his life. That I think I have done. I am contented to go from here on Tuesday with all that remains of my patient and my friend, and expect to keep close to him until he is deposited in his tomb. 9 months of close attention to him have only endeared him to me. I have learned to know him as few only can know him. The world can know him as a great general, as a successful politician, but I know him as a patient, self-sacrificing, gentle, quiet, uncomplaining sufferer, looking death calmly in the face and counting almost the hours he had to live. And those hours were studied by him that he might contribute something of benefit to some fellow sufferer. He was great in his life. He was even greater in his death. Not a murmur, not a moan, nor a sigh from the first to the last. He died as he lived, a true man.
There was other support that my father needed at this time. He was not an accomplished author by any means, and to struggle against the illness that plagued him at the end made this book project that much more difficult. That is when our great friend, Mr. Sam Clemens, better known to you as Mr. Twain, came to encourage my father in his final task. And he did so on many occasions while we were still in New York. My father needed this encouragement. When we came here to the mountain, Mr. Twain visited once. Mr. Dawson, our stenographer, and we stayed up all night trying to complete the second volume. I remember towards morning, I must have been dozing, Mr. Twain looked at me, and he said, "Are you weary, Fred?" I said, "Yes, of course, but not half as weary as the man in the next room."
General Grant told me in the fall of '84 that there was something the matter with his throat, and that, at the suggestion of the physicians, he had reduced his smoking to 1 cigar a day. He then added in a casual way that he didn't even care about that one and seldom smoked it. I could understand that feeling. He had set out to conquer not the habit, but the inclination, the desire. He had gone to the root, not the trunk. It's the perfect way, and the only way. I speak from experience. How I do hate these enemies of the human race who go around enslaving God's free people with pledges to quit drinking instead of wanting to quit drinking. The sick room brought out the points of General Grant's character, some of them particularly, to wit, his patience, his indestructible equability of temper, his exceeding gentleness, kindness, forbearance, lovingness, and charity, his loyalty to friends, convictions, to promises, to half-promises. There was a requirement of him which I considered an atrocity, an injustice, an outrage. I wanted to implore him to repudiate it. Fred Grant said, "Save your labor. I know him. He is in doubt whether he made that half-promise or not, and he is willing to give the thing the benefit of the doubt. He will fulfill that half-promise or kill himself trying." Fred Grant was right. He did fulfill it. His aggravatingly trustful nature, his genuineness, simplicity, modesty, diffidence, self-deprecation, poverty in the quality of vanity, and in no contradiction to this last, his simple pleasure in the flowers and general ruck sent to him by Tom, Dick, and Harry from everywhere. A pleasure that suggested a perennial surprise that he could be the object of so much fine attention. He was the most lovable, great child in the world. And his fortitude. He was under sentence of death last spring. He sat thinking, musing, for several days, nobody knows about what. Then he pulled himself together and set out to finish that book, a colossal task for a dying man. Presently, his hand gave out. Fate seemed to have got him checkmated. Dictation was suggested. No, he could never do that. I'd never tried it. Too old to learn now. By and by, if he could do appomattox, well. So he sent for a stenographer and dictated 9,000 words at a single sitting, never pausing, never hesitating for a word, never repeating, and in the written out copy, hardly a correction. I enlarged the book. I had to. Then he lost his voice, but he was not quite done, however. There was no end of little plums and spices to be stuck in here and there. At this work he patiently continued a few lines a day with his pad and pencil till far into July at Mount McGregor. One day he put his pencil aside and said he was done. There was nothing more to do. If I had been there, I could have foretold the shock that struck the world 3 days later. He was a very great man and superlatively good.
The closer my father drew to the end, the more his desire to see unity in his nation, a desire that had been in him throughout his life. My father may have been in 2 wars. He may have been an apt general, but he never liked war. Never had an affinity for it and hated the results of war. And he always believed that there was some way to avoid the drawing of the sword. This was no more apparent to me than in the world tour that I joined him on. Of course, the world leaders that met with my father, they saw a man that was known as a military hero in his own nation, and they, of course, wanted to speak to him about military matters. But my father would always steer the conversation towards methods for peace and avoiding war. My father truly had a vision for peace, not just for his own nation, but for the world. And he had the audacity to believe it was possible. He did want to believe the best in everyone. But he also knew the worst of what we were capable of. And as he learned in his later career, after the war, what Aristotle said, it is not enough to win a war, it is more important to organize the peace. And that was no less of a task than it was to win the war, to be certain. But it also meant extending an olive branch to those that it served in the rebellion. I remember this coming up in conversation with my father. He wrote the dedication when we were still in New York. And he signed it, dedicated it to the soldiers and sailors. But I told him, shouldn't it be more specific? Shouldn't it be Union soldiers and sailors? He said to me, it is a great deal better that it should be dedicated as it is. I made my reputation I have as a soldier. The troops engaged on both sides are yet living. As it is, the dedication is to those we fought against, as well as those we fought with. It may serve a purpose in restoring harmony. If it does, it is of more importance than to gratify a little vanity. You will die. It is hoped that the book will live. After you and the soldiers who fought are all gone, the dedication will have more value than now. My father was looking to the future. He knew that the wounds of the division that caused the Great War were not fully healed. and that it would take generations to do so. But he had hope. He had hope, and he expressed that. After we arrived here, my father received some correspondence from an A.M. Arnold from Rockbridge, Baths, Virginia. And it affected him quite deeply. Arnold wrote in his letter, "I hope you will allow one who, when but a boy, laid down his arms at Appomattox and gave in his allegiance to the Union, to express his warmest sympathy for you in this your hour of affliction. Dear General, I have watched your movements from the hour you gave me my horse and sword and told me to go home and assist in making a crop. I have been proud to see the nation do you honor. And now, dear General, in this hour of your tribulation, I weep that so brave, so magnanimous a soul must suffer as you do. My prayer to God daily is that you, dear General, may be restored to perfect health. And be assured that I am not the only ex-Confederate who sends his prayers daily to the throne of grace for the restoration of the grandest, the noblest, the bravest soldier, and the purest statesman who ever graced the annals of history. May the God who overlooked you in battle and who has brought you thus far give you grace to meet whatever he has in store for you, and may he restore you to health and friends, is the fervent prayer of one who at 16 years of age entered the list against you and accepted the magnanimous terms you accorded us at Appomattox." These are the letters that helped keep my father going. 2 weeks before my father's death, he would receive a visitor. He was not receiving many visitors at this time. His health precluded it. But when he heard that General Buckner wanted to call upon him, he said, "I must see him. I must see him." Mr. Buckner came and visited with my father. Sadly, by this time, my father's voice had been taken by the cancer, and so he was writing on a pad his notes. And they talked about the old times. They had gone to West Point together and served in the Mexican War. But also my father expressed his gratitude at the sympathies that Mr. Buckner brought with him from the Confederate veterans. But he also expressed his hope for the future of the nation, a united nation that would continue to heal.
General Grant wrote the following to me during my visit with him on Mount McGregor. "I have witnessed since my sickness," General Grant wrote, "just what I have wished to see ever since the war: harmony and good feeling between the sections. I have always contended that if there had been nobody left but the soldiers, we would have had peace in a year. We may now well look forward to a perpetual peace at home and a national strength that will screen us against any foreign complications. I believe myself that the war was worth all it cost us, fearful as that was. Since it was over, I have visited every state in Europe and a number in the East. I know now, as I did not before, the value of our institutions. Those are the noble sentiments of genuine patriotism, and I think that the general public ought to share with me the knowledge that General Grant holds such views. They show that he had only the good of his country at heart in the last moments of his patriotic life."
We were very touched by the words of one of my father's West Point classmates that had also gone into the Confederacy. James Longstreet, as I'm sure you're familiar with him. He was a very good friend of my father's. He said just after my father's death, he was the truest as well as the bravest man that ever lived. When we met at Appomattox, the first thing that General Grant said to me when we stepped inside, placing his hand in mine, was, "Pete, let us have another game of brag to recall the days that were so pleasant." Great God, I thought to myself, how my heart swells out to such magnanimous touch of humanity. Why do men fight who were born to be brothers? General Grant was a modest man, a simple man, a man believing in the honesty of his fellows, true to his friends, faithful to traditions, and of great personal honor. When the United States District Court in Richmond was about to indict General Lee and myself for treason, General Grant interposed and said, "I have pledged my word for their safety," and this stopped the wholesale indictments of ex-Confederate officers which would have followed. He was thoroughly magnanimous, was above petty things and small ideas, and after Washington was the highest type of manhood America has produced. My father's was a very brave man. He did not have many fears. He did not even fear the bullets during battle. It seemed that he was ignorant of his own danger in many situations, always focused on the task at hand. But I do know that he had one fear, because of all the time I was privileged to spend with him during our lives together. And I learned it at a fairly early age. My father was afraid, not of battle, not of death even, at the end here at Mount McGregor. He was afraid of being separated from us, his family. It had happened to him multiple times throughout his life. He was torn away from my mother during their courtship for 4 years in the Mexican War. And then he was separated from us once again as my mother was pregnant. And he was not able to meet my brother Ulysses until he was almost 2 years of age. And this gnawed at him. When this war broke out, I believe that my father knew that he had to do his duty, but he also had that fear come up once again, that this meant separation from his family. But that is the only thing that drove him beyond his fear of being separated, and that was his sense of duty. We have always been a tight-knit, supportive family. We have taken our cues from my father and his character. And that is why when we found that my father was dying, that we knew where our place was, and that was by his side. My siblings and I, and my mother, we stayed with him, and we were there to support him, just as he was dedicating his final year of his life to our future. And that was the great blessing of being here at Mount McGregor, is that we were able to be here with him to the last, live in the same home together, and offer him support at any moment that he may need it. And he did need it. He expressed this eternal hope in a final letter that I retrieved from his pocket as we prepared him to be placed in the casket. The very end spoke to this undying hope. He said, "With the knowledge I have of your love and affection and the dutiful affections of all our children, I bid you a final farewell until we meet in another, and I trust, better world." My father never gave up hope, just as he had never gave up hope that his country could be reunited and healed from the divisions that tore us apart. He retains hope beyond this world that we will be able to join him, that he won't be separated from his family. And I do hope that that is the case. My little pet Julia This was the first loss she had had. It was not just the loss of a grandfather, it was the loss of a friend. She went into the woods here, and the nurse helped her create an oak leaf wreath. It was placed on my father's casket, and she was very proud of this, and it helped her with her grief. She came to me shortly before we left for New York in the funeral procession, and she was very concerned because the wreath was starting to wilt, and I said, "Don't you worry, my little pet. I will varnish it, and we'll make sure it goes with Grandpapa down to his tomb. And that's where it will remain, the symbol of the love of his family for him." Now, Mr. Drexel, who has so generously provided everything for us here on the mountain, has also made it very clear that he intends to leave this home as a memorial to my father. Now, this came as somewhat of a surprise to me. Many memorials are made out of stone, of course, or tablets, metal tablets. So to have a home and all its contents left in someone's honor seemed a bit odd to me, but as I thought about it further, I realized that it was probably the very most fitting of memorials to my father, because much has already been written about him in terms of his military career and his political career. The story that is not told as often is the story of the man I knew. A devoted father, husband, and grandfather. And here he was not a general, he was not a president, as he sat here struggling against the terrible pain. He was a devoted family man, just trying to take care of his family at the end. And that is something that I hope the generations that come here will see. They will see the character that it takes to do what he did in these final months and these final days here. And I grew to admire my father greatly throughout our lives together. His work ethic, his sense of duty, all these things. And I did not think I could admire him any more than I did already. But here, this final year, I grew to admire him even more. This is a man who, facing death, did not give in to the selfish. Instead, he gave everything of himself. The most selfless of things. And this place will be a memorial to that man, because many other memorials will be built across this nation, made of stone, and remembering him as a great military hero, a great politician. But this will be unique. Things will change. Technology will come. The world will change around future generations. But human nature stays the same. And I hope that people can come here and see the man I knew. Timeless character traits. I know that if I was just a portion of the man that my father was, I would be doing well. And I hope others see that as well. And that others will learn about his desire for peace and hope for his nation. Because I am sure that our nation will go through similar things in the future. And we need the memory of people like my father in his heart. He did not hate the Southerners, never has. Our family was split by the war like many. We must not see each other as less than human. We must see each other as my father did, as all Americans. A common heritage, common love of country. My father left his hope in writing at the end of his book that will be published this fall. His eternal hope. Ensconced in the words, "I feel that we are on the eve of a new era, where there is to be a great harmony between the Federal and Confederate. I cannot stay to be a living witness to the correctness of this prophecy, but I feel within me that it is to be so. The universally kind feeling expressed for me at a time when it was supposed that each day would be my last seemed to me to be the beginning of the answer to let us have peace. The true desire of my father's heart was peace. Now, if you'll join me in standing, we'll recognize the flag. Flag of mourning in remembrance of my father.